Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to drift back through the mists of time? To a world where wooden ships carved paths through icy northern waters, and entire cities rose to power not through conquest, but through the simple act of cooperation? Tonight we embark on such a journey. One that will carry us back 8 centuries to witness the birth and life of something extraordinary. Network of cities that once controlled the very heartbeat of medieval Europe. Picture, if you will, the gentle lapping of waves against weathered dock posts, the creak of rope and timber swaying in Baltic winds. Imagine merchant vessels heavy with cargo, their holds filled with amber from distant shores, furs from the northern wilderness, and barrels of herring that would feed kingdoms. This is the world we're about to explore, a world where commerce flowed like rivers between nations, where handshake agreements held more power than royal decrees, and where a collection of towns along the northern seas quietly became one of history's most influential trading empires, the Hanseatic League. Even the name whispers of distant shores and ancient mysteries. Perhaps you've never heard of it before tonight, or maybe you've caught glimpses of its story in old books or museum displays. But what was it really? In its simplest form, the Hanseatic League was a confederation of merchant towns and cities that stretched across northern Europe from the 12th to the 17th centuries. But to understand its true significance, we must think beyond simple definitions and enter a world where survival depended on unity, where prosperity came through shared purpose, and where the salt-tinged air carried dreams of wealth across the medieval world. Unlike the great empires, you might know those built on military conquest and ruled by kings, the Hanseatic League was something entirely different. It was a voluntary alliance bound not by sword or crown, but by mutual benefit and shared necessity. Cities joined not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. In an age when might typically made right, these merchant towns discovered that cooperation could be more powerful than conflict. The story will unfold together, spans centuries and continents, touching the lives of kings and commoners, pirates and priests, craftsmen and captains. It's a tale of how small beginnings can grow into something magnificent, how necessity can birth innovation, and how even the mightiest powers must eventually yield to the turning of time's wheel. As we journey through this forgotten empire, you'll discover how these northern traders didn't just move goods across the seas, they moved ideas, cultures, and the very concept of what it meant to live and work together in medieval Europe. But our story doesn't begin with grand proclamations or royal charters. Instead, it starts quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the first stirrings of dawn over a sleeping harbor. It begins with individual merchants, loading their small vessels with hope and determination, venturing into waters both literal and metaphorical that had never been charted before. And from these humble beginnings, something remarkable would emerge. A network that would reshape the medieval world and leave echoes that still whisper to us today. So settle back. Let the gentle rhythm of our words carry you forward, and prepare to discover a world where the greatest power wasn't held by those who commanded armies, but by those who understood the quiet strength of working together. As we drift deeper into the past, the world around us transforms, and we find ourselves in an age when Europe was still finding its shape, still discovering what it would become. The year is 1150, and the landscape before us is one of stark contrasts and endless possibilities. To truly understand the birth of the Hanseatic League, we must first feel the cold salt spray of the Baltic Sea on our faces and understand the world that would give birth to this remarkable alliance. Imagine standing on a windswept shore, watching the sun struggle through gray clouds that seem to perpetually hover over these northern waters. The Baltic Sea stretches before you like a vast, steel-colored mirror, its surface broken only by the dark silhouettes of islands and the occasional white sail of a merchant vessel brave enough to challenge its waters. This is not the warm, welcoming Mediterranean that cradled ancient civilizations, but something altogether different. Our unforgiving sea that demands respect and rewards courage. The coastline tells its own story of survival and adaptation. Rocky promontories jut into the water like ancient fingers, while dense forests of pine and oak stretch inland as far as the eye can see. These woods are not empty, they teem with wildlife. harbor communities of hunters and woodsmen, and hide treasures that would soon become the foundation of medieval commerce. Amber, that golden fossil resin, lies scattered along beaches like gifts from prehistoric forests. Fur-bearing animals move through the shadows, their pelts destined to warm nobles in distant lands. And beneath the forest floor lie deposits of salt and iron. That will fuel the engines of trade. The towns of this era are nothing like the sprawling cities we know today. They cluster around natural harbors, their wooden buildings huddled together for warmth and protection. Smoke rises from countless chimneys, carrying with it the sense of daily life: baking bread, smoking fish, the tang of metalwork from busy forges. The streets, if they can be called that, are narrow paths worn smooth by countless feet, winding between structures that seem to lean on each other for support against the northern winds. But it's not just the physical landscape that shapes this world, it's the human one as well. This is an age of feudalism, where power flows downward from kings to nobles to common folk in a rigid hierarchy that has governed European society for generations. Yet here, along these northern shores, something different is stirring. The traditional feudal system doesn't quite fit the needs of people whose livelihoods depend on the sea's uncertain moods and the demands of international trade. The merchants of this era are a hardy breed, shaped by necessity into something between entrepreneurs and adventurers. They load their vessels sturdy, broad-beamed ships called cogs that can weather Baltic storms with whatever goods their regions can provide. From the forests come timber and furs. From the coasts come fish and salt. From scattered mines come iron and copper. But the challenge isn't just in gathering these goods, it's in moving them safely across waters that harbor both natural dangers and human threats. Piracy is a constant companion to medieval commerce. Small, fast vessels lurk in hidden coves and behind rocky islands, waiting to pounce on merchant ships heavy with valuable cargo. These aren't the romanticized pirates of later centuries, but desperate men driven by poverty or greed to prey upon honest traders. A merchant sailing alone is easy prey. His goods, and often his life, forfeit to whoever commands the fastest ship and the sharpest sword. Even without pirates, the sea itself presents endless challenges. Storms can rise without warning, turning calm waters into ship-crushing walls of green and white. Navigation is an art more than a science, dependent on familiar landmarks, the position of stars, and the accumulated wisdom of generations of sailors. Many ships simply vanish, swallowed by the Baltic's moods, their crews joining the countless souls the sea has claimed over the centuries. Then there are the political complications. Every noble with a stretch of coastline sees merchant vessels as opportunities for taxation. Rivers must be navigated past castle after castle, each lord demanding his toll. Port cities impose their own fees and regulations. What begins as a profitable cargo can be whittled away by endless payments until the merchant barely breaks, even on his dangerous journey yet. Despite all these challenges, or perhaps because of them, the northern seas are becoming increasingly alive with commercial activity. The growing populations of medieval Europe create ever greater demand for goods, and the northern regions have much to offer. The key is finding ways to overcome the obstacles that make individual trading so precarious and unprofitable. It's in this world of opportunity and danger, of individual courage facing systemic challenges, that the seeds of something extraordinary are beginning to sprout. Merchants are starting to realize that the problems that seem insurmountable to one person might be manageable to many. The storms that can destroy a single ship become less threatening to a fleet. The pirates who can overwhelm one vessel think twice about attacking several. The tolls that bankrupt individual traders become negotiable when entire groups of merchants present unified fronts. As our journey continues, we'll witness how these realizations slowly transform from desperate hopes into practical realities, and how the harsh necessities of northern trade will give birth to something unprecedented in medieval Europe—a voluntary alliance that will grow to challenge the power of kings themselves. In the quiet hours before dawn, When the first fishing boats slip their moorings and venture onto waters still dark with night, we can almost hear the conversations that would change the course of medieval history. Picture a group of merchants gathered in a tavern's smoky warmth, their hands wrapped around wooden cups of ale, their voices low as they share the frustrations and fears that have become part of every trading journey. Lost another ship last month, one might say, his weathered face reflecting years of hard-won experience. Pirates took her off the Danish coast. Good men gone, and a season's profit with them. Round the table, heads nod in understanding. Each man has similar stories: vessels lost to storms, cargoes seized by opportunistic nobles, crews abandoned in foreign ports when ventures failed. The life of a medieval merchant is precarious. It's balanced on the knife's edge between prosperity and ruin. But in these quiet moments of shared hardship, something remarkable is beginning to happen. These independent traders are discovering that their individual struggles are part of a larger pattern. The challenges facing one are faced by all. And from this recognition comes a revolutionary idea. What if they didn't have to face these dangers alone? The concept of merchant cooperation isn't entirely new. Even in ancient times, traders formed temporary partnerships for specific voyages, sharing costs and risks. But what's emerging in the northern seas during the 12th and 13th centuries goes deeper than simple business arrangements. It's the gradual recognition that systematic cooperation might not just solve individual problems, it might transform the entire nature of Northern European trade. Consider the practical challenges that drive this evolution. A single merchant ship, no matter how well built or bravely crewed, presents an attractive target for pirates. But a convoy of ships, sailing together with coordinated defenses, becomes a much more formidable presence on the waves. Pirates, like all predators, prefer easy prey to dangerous confrontations. The sight of multiple vessels flying the same banners, their crews ready to defend each other, is often enough to send would-be attackers searching for more vulnerable targets. The benefits extend beyond simple protection. When merchants travel together, they can share the costs of navigation and piloting, employing the most experienced sailors to guide entire fleets through treacherous waters. They can pool resources to maintain better charts and gather more accurate information about weather patterns, political situations, and market conditions in distant ports. Knowledge that might bankrupt an individual trader to acquire becomes affordable when shared among many. But perhaps most importantly, unified merchants discover they can negotiate from positions of strength that individual traders could never achieve. When a single merchant approaches a lord demanding tolls, he has little choice but to pay whatever is asked or risk having his goods confiscated. But when representatives of an entire trading network make the same approach, suddenly the conversation changes. The lord must consider not just the loss of one merchant's fees, but the possibility that an entire stream of valuable commerce might find alternative routes. This shift in negotiating power doesn't happen overnight. It emerges gradually as individual merchants begin to see the benefits of coordination and cooperation. A group of traders from Lübeck might agree to sail together to Gotland, sharing protection and costs. Merchants from Hamburg discover that by timing their departures to coincide with others, they can create impromptu convoys that serve everyone's interests. Word spreads of successful cooperative ventures, and the practice slowly becomes more common and more sophisticated. The evolution from individual cooperation to systematic alliance is facilitated by several factors unique to Northern European trade. Unlike the Mediterranean, where ancient trading patterns and established powers dominate commerce, the Baltic Sea represents something of a frontier. There are fewer entrenched interests to overcome, more opportunities for innovation. The relatively recent settlement of many coastal areas means that traditional feudal hierarchies are less rigid, creating space for new forms of economic organization. The merchants themselves are often recent arrivals, drawn to coastal towns by expanding trade opportunities. They're not bound by generations of local tradition or family obligations that might prevent them from adapting to new circumstances. They're entrepreneurs by necessity, willing to experiment with new approaches if those approaches promise better results. Religious factors also play a role in fostering cooperation. The spread of Christianity throughout Northern Europe provides a common framework of values and practices that help bridge cultural differences between merchants from different regions. Shared faith creates trust, and trust is the foundation upon which all successful commercial relationships are built. When a German merchant meets a Swedish trader, their common Christianity provides an immediate basis for mutual understanding and cooperation. The geographical nature of Baltic trade also encourages alliance formation. Unlike land-based commerce, where routes are relatively fixed and competitors clearly defined, sea trade is fluid and dynamic. A merchant who is a competitor on one route might be a valuable ally on another. The complex web of seasonal trading patterns, where different goods are available at different times from different regions, creates countless opportunities for mutually beneficial partnerships. As these early alliances prove their worth, they begin to formalize and expand. Written agreements replace handshake deals. Regular meetings are established to coordinate activities and resolve disputes. What begins as informal cooperation among a few merchants slowly evolves into something more structured and permanent. The most successful of these early alliances share certain characteristics. They're based on genuine mutual benefit rather than domination by stronger members. They maintain flexibility, allowing members to pursue individual opportunities while supporting collective action when needed. And they develop mechanisms for enforcing agreements and resolving conflicts without resorting to outside authorities who might not understand or support merchant interests. But these early seeds of cooperation are just the beginning. As successful alliances demonstrate their effectiveness, they attract attention from other merchants and other towns. The idea of systematic commercial cooperation begins to spread along the northern trade. Routes like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. And in one particular town, it's blessed with an ideal location and governed by leaders who understand the potential of merchant alliance, these ripples are about to create waves that will reshape medieval Europe. ... They're single quotes. Something almost magical about certain places' locations that seem destined to become more than the sum of their geographical advantages. As we continue our journey through time, we find ourselves approaching one such place, a town that would grow from humble beginnings to become the beating heart of medieval Europe's greatest commercial alliance. Welcome to Lübeck, the quiet birthplace of the Hanseatic League, situated where the rivers Trave and Wakenitz converge before flowing into the Baltic Sea. Lübeck occupies one of those rare positions that geography seems to have designed specifically for commerce. The town sits on a small island, naturally defended by water on three sides, with access to both river and sea routes that connect it to the vast network of northern European waterways. From this single point, merchants can reach the Baltic's eastern shores, travel south into the heart of the German lands, or venture west toward the North Sea and beyond. But Lübeck's rise to prominence isn't just a story of geographical advantage, it's a testament to the power of vision and leadership at critical moments in history. The town's modern incarnation begins in 1143, when Count Adolf II of Schauenberg recognizes the site's potential and establishes a settlement designed specifically to attract merchants and craftsmen. This isn't the typical medieval town that grows organically around a noble's castle or a religious foundation. From its very conception, Lübeck is planned as a commercial center, with wide streets suitable for wagons, market squares designed to accommodate large gatherings, and harbor facilities intended to handle substantial maritime traffic. The genius of Lübeck's founders lies not just in recognizing the town's commercial potential, but in creating legal and social structures that support merchant activities. The town is granted special privileges that set it apart from typical feudal settlements. Merchants are offered citizenship rights that protect them from arbitrary taxation and seizure of goods. The town develops its own legal code, designed to handle commercial disputes quickly and fairly. Most importantly, Lübeck establishes itself as a free city, owing allegiance to distant imperial authority but maintaining practical independence in managing its own affairs. These innovations attract merchants from across Northern Europe, German traders bring connections to the empire's extensive commercial networks. Scandinavian merchants offer access to the rich resources of the northern forests and the profitable trade routes that connect the Baltic to far-off Novgorod. Flemish craftsmen arrive with sophisticated manufacturing techniques and connections to the growing textile markets of Western Europe. Each group brings not just their goods and skills, but their knowledge of distant markets and trading opportunities. As Lübeck grows, it develops something unprecedented in medieval Europe, a truly international commercial culture. The town's streets echo with multiple languages as merchants from different regions negotiate deals and share information. The harbor hosts vessels flying dozens of different banners, their crews representing the full diversity of Northern European maritime traditions. Local taverns become informal exchanges where news from distant markets spreads almost as quickly as it travels by ship, and where individual merchants can connect with partners for ventures they could never attempt alone. This cosmopolitan atmosphere doesn't emerge by accident. Lübeck's leaders consciously foster an environment that welcomes foreign merchants and encourages cooperation across cultural boundaries. The town's laws protect foreign traders' rights and ensure that disputes are resolved impartially. Religious tolerance, remarkable for the medieval period, allows merchants of different Christian traditions to worship according to their customs while participating fully in commercial life. But Lübeck's most significant contribution to medieval commerce isn't its facilities or its laws. Its role as an incubator for the ideas and practices that will eventually become the Hanseatic League. Within the town's merchant community, principles of cooperative trading that we saw emerging across Northern Europe are refined and systematized. Lübeck becomes a laboratory, where different approaches to merchant alliance are tested and improved. The town's merchants are among the first to develop formal partnership agreements that extend beyond individual voyages to encompass entire trading seasons or multiple ventures. They create standardized contracts that can be used by merchants from different regions, reducing the time and uncertainty involved in forming new business relationships. Most importantly, they begin to think systematically about how merchant cooperation can be extended beyond Lübeck itself to create broader regional alliances. The physical transformation of Lübeck during this period reflects its growing importance. The modest wooden structures of its early years give way to substantial brick buildings that demonstrate both prosperity and permanence. Warehouses line the harbor, their size and number testament to the volume of goods flowing through the town. Churches rise to rival those of much older cities, their spires visible from far out at sea, serving as landmarks for arriving merchants and symbols of the town's growing status. The famous Holstetter, Lübeck's distinctive twin-towered gate, won't be built for another 2 centuries. But already the town is developing the architectural character that will make it one of medieval Europe's most recognizable cities. The brick Gothic style that will become synonymous with Hanseatic architecture is emerging, reflecting both practical considerations, durability needed for buildings that must withstand harsh northern weather, and aesthetic preferences. Shaped by the cosmopolitan merchant culture, as Lübeck's influence grows, it begins to extend beyond its own borders. The town's merchants establish regular trading relationships with partners in other Baltic ports. They negotiate preferential treatment for Lübeck traders in foreign markets. Most significantly, they begin to coordinate their activities with merchants from other towns, creating the kind of regional cooperation that will eventually evolve into the Hanseatic League. These early alliances are informal, but effective. Lübeck merchants sailing to Gotland might coordinate their departure with traders from Hamburg, creating convoys that provide mutual protection. Information about market conditions in distant ports is shared freely among alliance partners, giving everyone better knowledge for making trading decisions. When disputes arise with foreign authorities, allied merchants present unified fronts that carry much more weight than individual complaints. The success of these cooperative ventures doesn't go unnoticed by other towns. Throughout the Baltic region, coastal communities that have watched Lübeck's rapid rise begin to consider how they might achieve similar prosperity. Some attempt to compete directly with Lübeck, but most recognize that the town's advantages, its ideal location, its established merchant networks, its sophisticated commercial culture make direct competition difficult. Instead, an increasing number of towns begin to explore the possibility of alliance with Lübeck. They see the benefits that Lübeck's merchants enjoy through cooperation, and wonder whether those same benefits might be extended to willing partners. The stage is being set for something unprecedented in medieval history. A voluntary confederation of cities united not by conquest or royal decree, but by mutual commercial interest and the shared recognition that cooperation serves everyone's benefit better than competition. As word of Lübeck's innovations spreads along the northern trade routes, a question begins to form in the minds of merchants and town leaders across the region. If cooperation works so well for merchants within a single town, might it work even better for merchants across many towns? The answer to that question will create an empire unlike any the medieval world has ever seen. Like morning mist rising from calm waters. The transformation from individual merchant cooperation to something far grander happens almost imperceptibly at first. Then, with gathering momentum that surprises even those who helped set it in motion, we're witnessing one of history's most remarkable examples of organic growth. The emergence of the Hanseatic League, not through conquest or royal decree, but through the simple recognition that what works for a few might work for many. The process begins with messages letters carried by merchants traveling between ports, verbal agreements made in harborside taverns, handshake deals that gradually expand to encompass entire communities. A successful partnership between Lübeck and Hamburg merchants leads to discussions about broader cooperation. Word of profitable joint venture spreads to Bremen, then to the emerging ports along the Baltic's eastern shores. Each success creates curiosity about participation, which benefit demonstrates the potential for expansion. Hamburg is among the first to formally align itself with Lübeck's growing network. The city's position near the mouth of the Elbe River gives it natural advantages for trade with the German interior. But its merchants face the same challenges that originally drove Lübeck's traders to seek cooperation. Pirates, unpredictable tolls, and the constant risks of individual trading make alliance an attractive proposition. When Hamburg's merchant leaders meet with their Lübeck counterparts, they discover that their individual strengths complement each other perfectly. Lübeck's Baltic connections and Hamburg's access to inland markets create opportunities that neither city could develop alone. The alliance between Lübeck and Hamburg becomes a model for expansion throughout the region. Rather than creating a rigid hierarchy with Lübeck dominating its partners, the growing network maintains a collaborative structure where each member contributes, according to its strengths and benefits, according to its participation. Hamburg brings its river trade expertise, Lübeck offers its Baltic connections, and together they create something more valuable than the sum of their individual contributions. Bremen joins the alliance through a slightly different path. As a port city near the North Sea, Bremen's merchants have developed different specialties from their Baltic counterparts. They've mastered trade with England and the Low Countries, bringing goods like English wool and Flemish textiles into the German lands. When Bremen's leaders realized that alliance with the Lübeck-Hamburg New York could give them access to Baltic products while offering their partners new Western markets, the benefits of membership become irresistible. The addition of Bremen marks a crucial moment in the League's development. What began as a Baltic trading alliance is now becoming something broader, a network that spans multiple seas and connects diverse regional economies. The League is discovering that its strength lies not in uniformity, but in diversity. Not in controlling specific trades, but in facilitating connections between different markets and specialties. As the network expands eastward along the Baltic coast, each new member brings unique advantages and opportunities. Danzig, strategically positioned where the Vistula River meets the sea, offers access to the rich agricultural lands of Poland and the amber deposits of the Baltic shores. The city's merchants have developed expertise in handling bulk cargoes, grain, timber, and raw materials that feed the growing populations and construction projects of Western Europe. Riga, further east, opens doorways to the vast forests of the Baltic region and the complex trade networks that connect Northern Europe to the Russian principalities. Through Riga, League merchants gain access to furs, honey, wax, and other forest products that command premium prices in Western markets. More importantly, Riga serves as a crucial link in the trade routes that ultimately connect Baltic commerce to the silk and spice trades of Asia. Bergen, on Norway's western coast, brings something entirely different to the League. Dominance of the North Atlantic fishing grounds and control of the stockfish trade that feeds much of medieval Europe during the long fasting periods mandated by Christian tradition. Bergen's inclusion in the League demonstrates the network's ability to incorporate diverse specialties and geographical regions into a coherent whole. The expansion process itself becomes increasingly sophisticated as the League grows. Early additions like Hamburg and Bremen join through relatively informal negotiations between merchant leaders. But as the network's value becomes apparent, the process of joining becomes more structured. Prospective members must demonstrate their ability to contribute meaningfully to League activities. They must show that their local laws and customs are compatible with League practices. Most importantly, they must convince existing members that their inclusion will benefit the network as a whole. This selective approach to expansion serves the League well. Rather than growing indiscriminately, the network expands strategically, adding members who complement existing strengths and fill gaps in geographical coverage or commercial specialization. The result is a confederation that becomes stronger with each addition. Rather than more unwieldy or difficult to coordinate, the League's structure evolves to accommodate its growing complexity. What begins as informal cooperation between a few merchant communities gradually develops more sophisticated mechanisms for coordination and decision-making. Regular meetings are established where representatives from member cities can discuss common challenges and opportunities. Standardized practices emerge for everything from weights and measures to contract terms and dispute resolution. Communication networks develop to keep League members informed about political changes, market conditions, and opportunities in distant regions. Merchants traveling between League cities carry not just goods, but information, creating an intelligence network that gives League members significant advantages over competitors, who must rely on less systematic information gathering. The League's growing influence begins to attract attention from traditional power centers, kings and nobles who once dealt with individual merchants or single cities now find themselves negotiating with representatives of a network that spans dozens of cities and controls significant portions of Northern European trade. The League's unified voice carries weight that individual members could never achieve, and its ability to redirect trade flows gives it leverage in political as well as commercial negotiations. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the League's formation is how it maintains cohesion without coercion. Unlike empires built through conquest or confederations held together by royal authority, the Hanseatic League remains a voluntary association. Cities join because membership benefits them, and they remain loyal because the benefits continue. This voluntary character becomes one of the League's greatest strengths, ensuring that members actively support League policies rather than merely submitting to them. As we watch this web of alliance spread across the northern waters, connecting cities and regions that had never before collaborated systematically, we're witnessing something unprecedented in medieval European history. The League is demonstrating that voluntary cooperation based on mutual benefit can be more powerful than traditional forms of authority, based on hierarchy and coercion. It's a lesson that will resonate far beyond the medieval period. It's offering insights that remain relevant to this day. But the League's formation is just the beginning of our story. Now that this remarkable network exists, how will it function? How will the daily lives of ordinary people be affected by this new form of organization? Our journey continues into the heart of Hanseatic society, where we'll discover how membership in this merchant alliance transforms not just commerce, but entire ways of life. Dawn comes slowly to a Hanseatic town, creeping across red-tiled roofs and cobblestone streets with the gentle persistence of northern light. As the first bells chime from church towers that pierce the morning mist, we find ourselves walking through streets that pulse with a rhythm unlike anywhere else in medieval Europe. This is daily life in a League city, a blend of international commerce and local tradition, of ancient customs and innovative practices, all woven together by the distinctive culture that Hanseatic membership has created. The day begins before sunrise in the harbor, where night watchmen tend to the dying embers of signal fires that have guided late arriving vessels to safe anchorage. The first workers to stir are the dockhands, sturdy men whose weathered faces speak of years spent loading and unloading the endless stream of cargo that flows through Hanseatic ports. They move with practiced efficiency through the pre-dawn darkness, checking mooring lines, inspecting warehouse locks, and preparing for another day of the commerce that sustains their city as light strengthens. The harbor comes alive with purposeful activity. Ship captains emerge from their cramped quarters to check the wind and sky, calculating weather conditions favor departure for distant ports. Merchants appear, ledger books tucked under their arms, ready to verify overnight arrivals and plan the day's negotiations. The air fills with a babel of languages: Low German, Swedish, Norwegian, Flemish, and others as international crews prepare their vessels for whatever the day might bring. The warehouses that line the harbor, marvels of medieval logistics. Their thick brick walls designed to protect valuable cargoes from both weather and thieves. Inside these cavernous structures, goods from across the known world wait in carefully organized piles. Baltic amber glows like captured sunlight in wooden crates. Furs from the northern forests lie in neat bundles, their rich pelts destined to warm nobles in distant courts. Barrels of salt fish, the protein that sustains much of medieval Europe, stand in orderly rows. Sacks of grain from Polish fields lean against walls alongside bolts of Flemish cloth and bundles of English wool. The organization of these warehouses reflects the sophisticated systems that Hanseatic merchants have developed to handle international trade. Each type of good has its designated storage area, carefully chosen to optimize preservation and facilitate inventory management. Detailed records track every item's origin, ownership, and destination. The warehouse masters who oversee these operations are among the most trusted and skilled professionals in Hanseatic society, their expertise essential to the smooth functioning of international commerce. As morning progresses, the town's streets fill with the diverse cast of characters that Hanseatic membership attracts. Merchants stride purposefully between warehouses and counting houses, their fine woolen cloaks and confident bearing marking them as men of substance. Craftsmen hurry toward workshops where they transform raw materials into finished goods that will eventually find their way to distant markets. Apprentices dart through the crowds, carrying messages and small packages with the energy of youth eager to prove themselves in the world of commerce. The market squares that anchor every Hanseatic town are theaters of controlled chaos, where local and international commerce intersect in fascinating ways. Local farmers bring produce from the surrounding countryside, fresh vegetables, dairy products, and meat that feed the town's growing population. But alongside these familiar goods are items that speak of the wider world: exotic spices from the Orient, fine wines from France, exotic textiles that have traveled thousands of miles to reach these northern ports. The language of these markets is as international as the goods themselves. A Swedish merchant might negotiate in Low German with a Flemish textile dealer, while nearby a local craftsman demonstrates his wares to a visiting buyer from England. Children who grow up in Hanseatic towns naturally absorb multiple languages, their ears attuned to the polyglot environment that defines their daily experience. This linguistic diversity becomes one of the League's most valuable assets, enabling smooth communication across cultural boundaries that often divide medieval Europe. The architecture of Hanseatic towns reflects both their prosperity and their distinctive character. The famous brick Gothic style that becomes synonymous with League cities emerges from practical considerations. The durability of brick construction in harsh northern climates but develops into something aesthetically distinctive. The red brick facades that line Hanseatic streets create a visual unity that helps as visitors recognize League cities even from a distance. Church spires, guild halls, and merchant houses all share this architectural vocabulary. creating urban environments that are both functionally efficient and visually harmonious inside these buildings. Daily life unfolds according to rhythms shaped by both local tradition and international commerce. Merchant families live above their counting houses, their domestic routines punctuated by the arrival of messengers, carrying news from distant partners and the sounds of business conducted in the rooms below. Children grow up surrounded by maps, ledgers, and samples of exotic goods, their education naturally incorporating geographical and commercial knowledge that prepares them for potential careers in international trade. The guild system that governs craft production in Hanseatic towns adapts traditional medieval practices to accommodate international markets. Local craftsmen don't just serve local customers, they produce goods for export to League partners throughout Northern Europe. This international market exposure drives innovation and quality improvements that benefit everyone. A baker in Lübeck might develop new preservation techniques to ensure his goods remain fresh during long sea voyages. A metalworker in Hamburg might refine his techniques to meet quality standards demanded by customers in distant Bergen or Riga. Network. Multiple languages might be heard. Religious life in Hanseatic towns reflects the same international character that defines secular activities. Churches serve not just local congregations, but visiting merchants from throughout the League network. Multiple languages might be heard during services. And church architecture often incorporates decorative elements and artistic traditions from various regions. The merchant families who fund church construction and decoration ensures that these sacred spaces reflect the cosmopolitan character of Hanseatic society. The evening brings its own distinctive rhythms to Hanseatic towns. As the day's business winds down, the harbor settles into quieter activities, night loading of ships preparing for dawn departures, watchmen taking their positions, late arriving vessels seeking safe anchorage. In the town's taverns and inns, merchants from different regions share meals and exchange information about conditions in distant markets. These informal gatherings serve crucial functions in maintaining the personal relationships that underpin Hanseatic commerce, but perhaps the most remarkable aspect of daily life in a Hanseatic town is how seamlessly local and international elements blend together. Children play games learned from visiting merchants from other lands. Housewives prepare meals using spices and techniques acquired through exposure to international cuisine. Local festivals incorporate elements borrowed from League partners, creating celebrations that are distinctively Hanseatic. While honoring diverse cultural traditions, this blending doesn't erase local identity. Hanseatic town maintains its own character and traditions. Rather, it creates something new, communities that are simultaneously deeply rooted in their local environments and genuinely international in their outlook and connections. The result is a quality of life that combines the security and familiarity of local community with the excitement and opportunity of international involvement as night falls and the last ships are secured in the harbor. As the final entries are made in merchant ledgers and the last customers leave the market squares, Hanseatic towns settle into sleep with the quiet satisfaction of communities that have found their place in the world. They are local and global, traditional and innovative, secure in their identities, yet open to the wider world. Tomorrow will bring new ships, new goods, new opportunities, and new challenges. But the rhythm of life they have created will continue, steady as the tides that connect them to their League partners across the northern seas. But this daily rhythm depends on connections that stretch far beyond local harbors. To truly understand how Hanseatic towns sustain their distinctive way of life, we must follow their merchants and goods to the distant outposts where League influence extends into foreign lands, creating islands of Hanseatic culture and alien environments, in the candlelit chambers of foreign cities, behind gates that bear the familiar symbols of Hanseatic towns. We discover some of the most fascinating chapters in the League story. These are the contours, the distant trading posts that extend Hanseatic influence far beyond the Baltic shores, creating islands of Northern European culture in lands where different languages echo through unfamiliar streets. Each contour tells its own story of adaptation and persistence, of how merchants from the League's member cities created homes, away from home, in pursuit of commercial opportunity. The Steelyard in London stands as perhaps the most famous of these outposts. A complex of buildings on the Thames that serves as both commercial centre and diplomatic embassy for Hanseatic interests in England. Walking through its gates is like stepping from medieval London into a piece of transplanted Baltic culture. The architecture echoes the brick Gothic style of League cities, while the language of business is the Low German that serves as the lingua franca of Hanseatic commerce. Here, English wool meets Baltic amber, Flemish cloth encounters Russian furs, and the exotic spices of the Orient find their way into Northern European trade networks. The Steelyard's merchants don't simply visit London, they create a permanent Hanseatic presence in the heart of England's capital. They build homes where their families can live for years at a time, establish warehouses designed according to League standards for organization and security, and negotiate agreements with English authorities that give them trading privileges unavailable to other foreign merchants. The result is a community that remains distinctly Hanseatic while adapting to English customs and legal requirements. Life in the Steelyard follows rhythms that blend homeland traditions with local necessities. Merchants begin their days with prayers in German, but conduct their business according to English commercial law. They maintain the guild structures and apprenticeship systems of their home cities, but adapt these institutions to function within English society. Young men sent from Lübeck or Hamburg to learn the English trade don't just master new markets, they become cultural ambassadors, building the personal relationships that make international commerce possible. The Bergen contour presents different challenges and opportunities. Situated in one of Europe's most remote commercial centers, this outpost gives the League control over the North Atlantic, fishing grounds that supply much of medieval Europe with preserved fish. The contour's merchants don't just buy and sell, they organize the entire infrastructure of the stockfish trade, from the fishing fleets that work the dangerous northern waters to the processing facilities that prepare fish for long-distance transport. Bergen's harsh climate and isolated location mean that Hanseatic merchants stationed there must be particularly self-reliant. The contour develops into a self-contained community with its own craftsmen, its own food storage and preservation systems, and its own methods for maintaining contact with the outside world during the long northern winters when sea travel becomes impossible. The merchants who serve in Bergen often develop a distinctive character, hardy, independent, and deeply knowledgeable about the specialized demands of the North Atlantic trade. The Bruges contour operates in an entirely different environment. Situated in one of medieval Europe's most sophisticated commercial centers, it must compete with established merchant communities from across the continent. The Hanseatic merchants in Bruges don't enjoy the monopolistic positions they hold in London or Bergen. Instead, they succeed through the particular strengths that League membership provides: superior knowledge of Baltic markets, efficient organizational systems, and the ability to coordinate with partners across Northern Europe. Bruges becomes a crucial testing ground for Hanseatic commercial practices, competing with Italian, French, English merchants' forces, League traders to refine their techniques and demonstrate the practical advantages of their cooperative approach. The success of the Bruges contour provides compelling evidence that Hanseatic methods can compete effectively even in the most challenging commercial environments. Perhaps the most exotic of the major contours is the one established in Novgorod, the great Russian trading city that serves as the eastern terminus of the Baltic trade network. Here, Hanseatic merchants encounter a completely different cultural and commercial environment. The Orthodox Christianity of Novgorod contrasts sharply with the Catholicism of most League cities. The political structures of Russian principalities operate according to different principles from the city-states of Northern Europe. Even the physical environment, the vast forests and river systems of Russia requires different approaches to transportation and logistics. The Novgorod contour becomes a masterclass in cultural adaptation. Without cultural surrender, Hanseatic merchants learn enough Russian to conduct business effectively, but maintain their own language and customs within the compound. They adapt to local legal and commercial practices while preserving the organizational methods that make their operations successful. Most importantly, they develop deep knowledge of Russian markets and products, becoming the primary conduit through which Eastern goods reach Western European consumers. The establishment and operation of these distant counters requires sophisticated systems for communication, transportation, and management. Messages must travel between counters and home cities with reasonable speed and reliability. Goods must be transported across vast distances with minimal loss and damage. Personnel must be selected, trained, and rotated to prevent the isolation and cultural alienation that could undermine counter effectiveness. The League develops innovative solutions to these challenges. A system of regular courier services maintains communication between counters and home cities, carrying not just business correspondence but news, personal messages, and cultural materials that help maintain connections across vast distances. Standardized shipping containers and transportation methods minimize losses during long-distance transport. Most importantly, the League creates career paths that give young merchants incentives to serve in distant counters while ensuring they can eventually return to positions of responsibility in their home cities. The counters also serve as intelligence networks that give the League crucial advantages in international commerce. Merchants stationed in London provide early warning of changes in English trade policies. Those in Bergen monitor Scandinavian political developments that might affect northern trade routes. The Novgorod contour tracks the complex political situations of Russian principalities and their potential impacts on Eastern trade. This information flows back to League cities, enabling merchants throughout the network to adjust their strategies. Based on developments in distant markets, the cultural impact of the counters extends far beyond their immediate commercial functions. They serve as conduits for the exchange of ideas, technologies, and artistic influences between different regions of Europe. Architectural styles, artistic motifs, and even culinary traditions spread along the routes that connect counters to their home cities. The result is a gradual integration of Northern European culture that transcends political boundaries and creates shared identities across vast geographical distances. But perhaps the most remarkable achievement of the Kantar system is how it balances independence with integration. Each counter must be self-sufficient enough to function effectively in its local environment, yet integrated enough with the broader League network to contribute to collective success. The merchants who staff these outposts develop a distinctive character: cosmopolitan yet loyal, adaptable yet principled, independent yet collaborative. As we observe the daily operations of these distant outposts, we witness the practical mechanisms through which the Hanseatic League extends its influence across medieval Europe. The counters are more than just trading posts. They're the nerve endings through which the League senses opportunities and challenges in distant markets, the diplomatic missions through which it negotiates with foreign powers, and the cultural bridges through which it connects diverse regions of medieval Europe into something approaching a unified economic system. But commerce alone doesn't explain the League's remarkable success. To understand how these merchant towns transformed from local trading centers into a power that could challenge kings and reshape the medieval world, we must examine the wealth that flowed through their networks and the political influence that such wealth inevitably creates. Like rivers that carve canyons through persistent flow rather than sudden floods. The accumulation of Hanseatic wealth and influence happens gradually, almost imperceptibly, until observers suddenly realize they're witnessing something unprecedented in medieval European history. The transformation from merchant cooperation to genuine political power doesn't announce itself with fanfare or conquest. Emerges through the steady accumulation of economic advantage, the patient building of commercial relationships, and the gradual recognition that wealth, properly organized, can be more powerful than armies. The foundation of Hanseatic's prosperity lies in mastering trades that others find difficult or unprofitable. While Italian merchants dominate the lucrative spice and silk trades of the Mediterranean, and Flemish traders control much of the luxury cloth market, Hanseatic merchants become the undisputed masters of what might seem less glamorous, but ultimately more essential commodities: the salt, grain, timber, and preserved fish that sustain daily life across Northern Europe. Consider the salt trade, which forms one of the pillars of Hanseatic wealth. Salt isn't merely a seasoning in the medieval world, it's the primary method of food preservation. Essential for maintaining protein supplies through long winters and for sustaining populations in cities that depend on stored food. The League's merchants don't just trade in salt, they control many of the sources. From the coastal evaporation ponds of the North Sea to the inland salt deposits of Central Europe, this control gives them influence over food security across vast regions, a power that proves more durable than many military conquests. The herring fisheries of the North Sea provide another foundation for League prosperity. These massive seasonal runs of fish, properly preserved and distributed, can feed entire populations during the long fasting periods mandated by medieval Christianity. Hanseatic merchants developed the most efficient systems for catching, processing, and distributing herring, creating what amounts to a medieval food distribution network that spans the continent. Cities that depend on Hanseatic deliveries for their winter protein supplies find themselves naturally aligned with League interests, but perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Hanseatic wealth accumulation is how it transcends simple commodity trading to encompass entire economic systems. The League doesn't just move goods, it creates the infrastructure that makes large-scale commerce possible. League merchants establish standardized weights and measures that facilitate trade across regional boundaries. They develop credit systems that allow merchants to finance ventures without carrying dangerous amounts of coin. Across pirate-infested waters, they create insurance mechanisms that protect against the inevitable losses that accompany long-distance trade. These innovations might seem purely technical, but their cumulative effect is to give Hanseatic merchants decisive advantages over competitors who must operate with less sophisticated systems. A League merchant can complete transactions faster, with less risk and lower costs, than rivals who lack access to Hanseatic infrastructure. Over time, these advantages compound, directing an ever-increasing share of Northern European trade through League networks. The political implications of this economic dominance emerge gradually, but inexorably. Kings and nobles who once viewed merchants as useful but subordinate subjects begin to realize that their own prosperity depends significantly on maintaining good relationships with League representatives. A Hanseatic decision to redirect trade routes can devastate the revenue of entire regions. While League support can ensure the prosperity of cooperating territories, this shift in the balance of power doesn't happen through confrontation or dramatic gestures. Instead, it emerges through countless small interactions where Hanseatic merchants demonstrate that they can no longer be treated as subordinate petitioners. When a king demands excessive tolls from League traders, you might find that merchant vessels begin avoiding his territories, taking their valuable cargoes to more accommodating ports. When a noble attempts to seize League goods illegally, he discovers that such actions bring diplomatic pressure, not just from individual merchants, but from entire cities willing to coordinate their responses. The League's approach to wielding this growing influence reflects the merchant mindset that created it. Rather than seeking direct political control, Hanseatic cities prefer to maintain their independence while ensuring favorable conditions for commerce. They don't want to rule other regions, they want to trade with them profitably and safely. This approach often proves more effective than traditional conquest because it creates mutually beneficial relationships rather than rebellious, subjugated populations. The architectural transformation of Hanseatic cities during this period provides visible evidence of growing prosperity. The modest wooden structures of early merchant settlements give way to substantial brick buildings that demonstrate both wealth and permanence. Church spires rise to rival those of much older religious centers. Guild halls and merchant houses incorporate decorative elements that speak of international connections and sophisticated aesthetic sensibilities. But perhaps the most impressive architectural achievements are the warehouses and harbor facilities that serve as the physical Infrastructure of League commerce. These structures represent enormous investments in specialized construction.
Oh.
Designed to optimize the handling and storage of international trade goods, their size and sophistication rival the palace complexes of kings, but serve entirely commercial rather than ceremonial functions. The social transformation that accompanies economic success is equally remarkable. Merchant families that began as skilled craftsmen or small-scale traders find themselves achieving status that rivals traditional nobility. Their children receive educations that prepare them for international commerce, learning languages, geography, and mathematical skills that surpass those of many noble offspring. Marriage alliances develop between merchant families from different league cities, creating kinship networks that span the entire Hanseatic region. These social changes don't eliminate traditional hierarchies, but they create alternative paths to status and influence that operate outside feudal structures. A merchant's son can achieve prosperity and respect through commercial success, rather than inheritance or military service. This social mobility attracts ambitious individuals from across Northern Europe, contributing to the cosmopolitan character that distinguishes Hanseatic cities from more traditional medieval communities. The League's growing wealth also enables investments in activities that extend beyond immediate commercial interests. Hanseatic merchants become patrons of art and learning, commissioning works that celebrate their achievements and express their cultural values. They fund educational institutions that train future generations of merchants and support scholarly activities that improve navigation, counting, and other skills essential to international commerce. Religious patronage provides another outlet for League wealth and a means of expressing Hanseatic identity. The distinctive churches of League cities, with their soaring brick Gothic architecture and rich decorative programs, serve as monuments to merchant prosperity and symbols of civic pride. The religious art commissioned by Hanseatic patrons often incorporates themes related to commerce and travel, creating a distinctive sacred aesthetic that reflects the merchant origins of its supporters. International diplomacy increasingly requires acknowledgement of Hanseatic interests. Kings negotiating treaties must consider how their agreements might affect League trade. Military campaigns must account for potential disruptions to commercial routes that provide crucial revenues. Even matters that seem purely political often have commercial dimensions that give the League legitimate interests in their outcomes. The League's influence extends beyond formal diplomatic channels through the personal relationships that Hanseatic merchants maintain with political leaders throughout Northern Europe. A king's son might have been educated alongside merchant children in a Hanseatic city. A noble's daughter might be married to a League merchant. These personal connections create informal networks that complement the League's formal diplomatic activities, but this growing power doesn't corrupt the fundamental principles that created Hanseatic success. The League remains committed to voluntary cooperation, mutual benefit, and the maintenance of favorable conditions for commerce, rather than the accumulation of power for its own sake. This restraint proves to be one of the League's greatest strengths, ensuring that its influence remains welcome rather than resented in most regions where it operates. As we witness this remarkable transformation from merchant cooperation to genuine political influence, we see something unprecedented in medieval European history: the emergence of an alternative to traditional feudal power structures. The League demonstrates that voluntary association based on mutual benefit can achieve results that rival those of more coercive forms of organization. But such success inevitably attracts challenges from those who prefer more traditional approaches to power and wealth. The morning mist clings to the water's surface as a fleet of merchant vessels emerges from the harbor, their sails catching the first gentle breeze of dawn. But these aren't ordinary trading ships making solitary voyages. They move together with the purposeful coordination of vessels that have learned survival depends on unity. Each ship flies the distinctive banners of Hanseatic cities, and their hulls are built not just for cargo capacity, but for the ability to defend themselves and their companions against the predators that lurk in the shadowy coves and hidden channels of the northern Lausanne seas. The story of Hanseatic naval power is unlike the maritime tales of conquest and empire that mark other medieval powers. This is defensive strength born of commercial necessity. A reluctant but determined militarization driven by the simple need to protect honest trade from those who prefer theft to labor. The League's merchants don't seek naval dominance for its own sake. They seek the security that allows commerce to flourish without constant fear of loss and violence. The threat they face is very real and increasingly organized. Piracy in the Baltic and North Seas isn't the romantic adventure of later literature, but a brutal business that threatens the foundation of medieval commerce. Pirates like the notorious Victual brothers, originally legitimate privateers, who turn to full-scale piracy when their commissions operate from hidden bases throughout the region, emerging suddenly to attack merchant vessels before disappearing again into the maze of islands and inlets that characterize northern European waters. The Victual brothers represent piracy at its most sophisticated and dangerous. These aren't desperate men in leaky boats, but will organize fleets with their own supply networks, diplomatic connections, and strategic objectives. They understand the rhythms of merchant shipping, know the most profitable trade routes, and coordinate their attacks to maximize both immediate gains and long-term disruption of Hanseatic commerce. At their height, they control entire islands and sections of coastline, operating with the confidence of an alternative government that levies its own taxes through violence rather than consent. The League's response to this threat evolves gradually from reactive defense to systematic deterrence. Initially, individual cities hire armed escorts for their merchant fleets, warships that accompany trading vessels and fight off attackers when necessary. But as the pirate threat grows more organized and sophisticated, it becomes clear that defensive measures must be equally coordinated and professional. The transformation of Hanseatic merchant vessels themselves provides the first line of defense. The distinctive cog design that characterizes League shipping incorporates defensive features alongside commercial efficiency. High sides make boarding difficult, while reinforced construction can withstand ramming attempts that would sink less robust vessels. Crews are trained not just in sailing and cargo handling, but in basic combat techniques and ship defense. More importantly, League ships begin traveling in coordinated convoys that provide mutual protection. A single merchant vessel remains vulnerable to pirate attack, but a group of well-armed ships sailing together presents a much more formidable target. Pirates, like all predators, prefer easy prey to dangerous confrontations. The sight of multiple vessels flying Hanseatic banners, their crews prepared for defense, is often enough to convince potential attackers to seek less prepared victims. The convoy system requires sophisticated coordination that demonstrates the League's growing organizational capabilities. Ships must synchronize their departure schedules, agree on routes and stopping points, and maintain formations that balance defensive effectiveness with navigational efficiency. Captains must subordinate their individual preferences to collective security needs, accepting delays and route modifications that serve group rather than individual interests. But convoys alone aren't sufficient to address the most serious pirate threats. The League gradually recognizes that true security requires the ability to take offensive action against pirate bases and fleets. This realization leads to one of the most remarkable developments in medieval military history, the creation of what amounts to merchant navy with genuine naval combat capabilities. The League's approach to naval warfare reflects its fundamentally commercial character. Rather than seeking conquest or territorial expansion, Hanseatic naval forces focus on specific, limited objectives: destroying pirate bases, capturing pirate vessels, and ensuring safe passage for merchant shipping. These aren't campaigns of imperial expansion, but police actions designed to create secure conditions for commerce. The most famous example of Hanseatic naval action comes in the campaign against the Victual brothers' stronghold on the island of Gotland. This operation requires unprecedented coordination between multiple League cities, with ships and men contributed according to each member's capabilities and interests. The campaign isn't just a military operation, but a demonstration of the League's ability to coordinate complex activities across vast distances and multiple political jurisdictions. The Siege of Gotland reveals both the strengths and limitations of Hanseatic military power. The League's forces prove capable of sustained operations far from their home bases, supplied and reinforced through the same commercial networks that support peaceful trade. Their tactics emphasize efficiency and limited objectives rather than glory or conquest. When the pirate stronghold falls, the League doesn't attempt to establish permanent control over Gotland. They destroy the pirate facilities, disperse the surviving pirates, and withdraw, leaving the island to be governed by others while ensuring it can no longer serve as a base for attacks on merchant shipping. The success of anti-piracy operations transforms the strategic situation in northern European waters. Pirates discover that attacks on Hanseatic shipping bring swift and effective retaliation. The League's growing reputation for defending its commerce serves as a deterrent that protects not just League members, but all merchant vessels that sail under Hanseatic protection or in Hanseatic company. This protective capability becomes another service that the League can offer to potential partners and allies. Cities that join the League gain access not just to commercial networks, but to naval protection that they could never afford to maintain independently. The League's naval power thus serves both defensive and diplomatic functions, providing security while demonstrating the benefits of membership to potential partners. The development of Hanseatic naval capabilities also drives technological innovation in shipbuilding and navigation. League shipyards develop designs that optimize both commercial capacity and defensive capability. Navigation techniques improve to support the coordination of multi-ship operations over vast distances. Communication systems evolve to enable rapid coordination between scattered naval units and their home bases. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Hanseatic naval power is how it remains subordinate to commercial rather than military objectives. The League never develops the kind of aggressive naval ambitions that characterize traditional maritime powers. Their fleets exist to protect trade, not to dominate seas or conquer territories. This restraint ensures that Hanseatic naval power enhances rather than threatens the commercial relationships that form the foundation of League prosperity. The League's approach to maritime security also reflects its fundamentally cooperative character. Rather than seeking to monopolize naval power in northern waters, the League often coordinates with other legitimate authorities in anti-piracy operations. Royal navies, when they exist and when their interests align with League objectives, can count on Hanseatic cooperation and support. The League's goal isn't naval dominance, but maritime security that benefits all honest commerce. As the sun sets behind our peaceful armada, its ships now secure in a friendly harbor after another successful voyage, we see the reflection of something remarkable in those calm waters. The League has demonstrated that commercial organizations can develop effective military capabilities without abandoning their fundamentally peaceful character. They've shown that defensive strength, properly organized and applied, can be more effective than aggressive expansion in achieving lasting security, but naval power and commercial success inevitably attract attention from traditional authorities who view such developments with mixtures of admiration, concern, and envy. The League's growing influence begins to intersect with the cultural and religious currents that shape medieval European society, creating new opportunities and new challenges. In the quiet moments between Vespers and Compline, when the last merchant ships of the day have secured their moorings and the harbor settles into evening calm, something remarkable becomes visible in the soft glow of candlelight filtering through the windows of Hanseatic cities. This is the hour when commerce gives way to culture, when the international community of traders becomes a genuine society bound together by more than mere commercial interest. We witness the emergence of a distinctly Hanseatic identity that transcends the boundaries of individual cities and creates something approaching a shared civilization across the northern European world. The great brick churches that dominate Hanseatic skylines serve as more than architectural landmarks. They are the spiritual centers of communities that have discovered how to blend local tradition with cosmopolitan influence. St. Mary's in Lübeck, with its soaring twin spires and innovative vaulting, becomes a model that inspires similar structures throughout the League network. But each church also reflects the particular character of its community, incorporating decorative elements and artistic traditions that speak to the diverse cultural influences flowing through Hanseatic trade routes inside these sacred spaces. The international character of League cities becomes most apparent. Services accommodate merchants from different regions, with prayers offered in multiple languages and musical traditions that blend Northern European styles into something uniquely Hanseatic. The art that adorns church walls and altars reflects this cultural fusion, painted panels that might include saints from German tradition, alongside decorative motifs borrowed from Scandinavian folk art, all executed by craftsmen whose techniques have been refined through exposure to artistic influences from across the medieval world. The religious calendar in Hanseatic cities adapts to accommodate the rhythms of international commerce while maintaining the spiritual foundations that bind communities together. The great festivals of Christmas and Easter become occasions, not just for local celebration, but for the strengthening of bonds between League cities. Merchants, who might be separated by hundreds of miles during most of the year, often coordinate their activities to be home for these celebrations, creating reunions that reinforce both family ties and commercial partnerships. But perhaps the most distinctive aspect of Hanseatic religious life is how it adapts to serve the needs of an international trading community. Churches develop specialized services for merchants preparing for dangerous voyages, with blessings for ships and crews that acknowledge both the spiritual and practical aspects of maritime commerce. Patron saints emerge, who are particularly associated with merchant activities. Saint Nicholas, protector of sailors and traders, becomes especially beloved in League cities, his feast day marking an important celebration that combines religious devotion with commercial networking. The guild system that governs craft production in Hanseatic cities serves both economic and cultural functions, creating social structures that bridge the gap between commercial competition and community solidarity. Each craft guild maintains its own chapel or altar in the city's main church, fostering religious devotion while providing organizational frameworks for mutual support and professional development. Guild festivals become important community celebrations that strengthen both professional relationships and civic identity. These guilds also serve as vehicles for artistic patronage that creates the distinctive aesthetic character of Hanseatic cities. Guild halls are decorated with paintings and sculptures that celebrate both religious themes and craft excellence. Guild banners and regalia incorporate symbols that blend Christian imagery with motifs related to specific trades, creating visual languages that express the integration of spiritual and commercial values that characterizes Hanseatic society. The international character of League cities creates educational needs that drive innovations in learning and scholarship. Young merchants must master not just the technical skills of their trades, but the languages, customs, and geographical knowledge necessary for international commerce. Schools develop curricula that combine traditional religious education with practical training in mathematics, languages, and navigation. The result is a level of literacy and numeracy that surpasses that found in most medieval communities. Libraries in Hanseatic cities reflect this practical approach to learning, housing not just religious texts and classical works, but collections of maps, trading manuals, and commercial correspondence that preserve the accumulated wisdom of generations of international merchants. These libraries become research centers where merchants can study market conditions in distant regions, learn about new trading opportunities, and access the technical knowledge necessary for expanding their operations. The distinctive literary culture that emerges in League cities reflects the blend of local tradition and international experience that characterizes Hanseatic society. Chronicles written by League merchants don't just record local events, but provide perspectives on international developments that affect Northern European commerce. Travel accounts describe not just the exotic locations that merchants visit, but the practical details of conducting business in foreign lands. Legal texts address the complex problems that arise when merchants from different legal traditions attempt to cooperate in commercial ventures. Music and performance in Hanseatic cities also reflect this cultural fusion. Church choirs incorporate musical traditions from throughout the league network, creating polyphonic compositions that blend different regional styles. Secular entertainment at guild festivals and merchant banquets includes performances by traveling musicians who carry songs and stories between league cities, creating shared repertoires of cultural expression that strengthen bonds between distant communities. The visual arts that flourish in league cities demonstrate how international commercial connections can stimulate local creativity. Painters working for merchant patrons develop styles that incorporate influences from throughout Northern Europe while maintaining distinctive regional characteristics. Sculptors creating decorative elements for churches and public buildings blend traditional motifs with exotic elements, countered through commercial connections. The result is an artistic environment that is both international and distinctly Hanseatic. The domestic architecture of merchant families reflects the same blend of prosperity and cosmopolitan influence. Merchant houses incorporate design elements borrowed from different regions, creating interiors that serve both practical commercial functions and social ceremonial needs. The great halls where merchants entertain business partners and community leaders are decorated with objects that demonstrate both wealth and international connections. Tapestries from the Low Countries, silverware from German workshops, amber jewelry from Baltic shores. Food culture in Hanseatic cities provides another example of how commercial connections transform daily life. Merchant families have access to spices, wines, and specialty foods from throughout the known world, creating cuisines that blend local ingredients with exotic seasonings. The great feasts that mark religious holidays and guild celebrations become showcases for culinary creativity that demonstrates both prosperity and sophisticated taste. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Hanseatic culture is how it maintains local distinctiveness, while creating genuine bonds between communities separated by vast distances. A merchant from Hamburg feels at home in Lübeck, not because the cities are identical, but because they share common values and cultural frameworks that transcend regional differences. Children growing up in different league cities develop similar worldviews and expectations. Despite living in distinct local environments, this shared cultural identity becomes one of the league's greatest strengths, creating loyalty and solidarity that can't be purchased with commercial agreements alone. Merchants don't just trade with each other, they share common stories, celebrate similar festivals, and understand each other's jokes and references. These cultural bonds prove more durable than purely commercial relationships and help the league maintain cohesion through the various challenges it will face as the last candles are extinguished in church windows and merchant houses settle into sleep. We see in the peaceful darkness of Hanseatic cities the reflection of something unprecedented in medieval Europe: communities that are simultaneously local and international, traditional and innovative, commercial and spiritual. They have created a culture that serves both practical commercial needs and deeper human desires for meaning and belonging. But this cultural achievement, like the commercial and naval successes that preceded it, doesn't exist in isolation. The very success of Hanseatic civilization creates tensions and challenges that will test the league's ability to maintain the unity and cooperation that made such success possible. Like hairline cracks that appear in ancient stone walls, invisible at first, but gradually widening under persistent pressure. The strains within the Hanseatic League begin to show themselves in ways that would have seemed impossible during the Confederation's golden age of expansion and prosperity. The very success that binds league cities together also creates new sources of tension, as individual members discover that their interests don't always align as neatly as they once did, and as the benefits of cooperation must be balanced against the costs of compromise. The first whispers of discord emerge from the most successful aspects of league operations. The counter-system that projects Hanseatic influence across medieval Europe creates unexpected complications as different member cities develop competing claims to leadership in foreign markets. Lübeck's merchants, drawing on their city's historical role as the league's founder, expect deference from representatives of newer or smaller member cities. But Hamburg's traders, confident in their city's growing prosperity and strategic importance, question why geographical proximity to the Baltic should determine precedence in North Sea operations. These disputes might seem petty to outside observers, but they reflect deeper questions about how the league should organize itself as it grows larger and more complex. The informal cooperation that worked well when the Confederation included only a few closely connected cities becomes more difficult to maintain. When dozens of communities must coordinate their activities, decision-making processes that relied on personal relationships and mutual trust become cumbersome when participants don't know each other personally and may have conflicting regional loyalties. The problem becomes particularly acute in matters of resource allocation and military cooperation. When the League organizes naval expeditions against piracy, which cities should provide ships and crews? Should contributions be based on each member's total wealth, their specific involvement in affected trade routes, or their historical commitment to League military activities? Different cities propose different formulas, each naturally favoring their own circumstances and capabilities. The tension between larger and smaller League members creates another persistent source of friction. Major cities like Lübeck, Hamburg, and Bremen contribute most of the resources for League operations and naturally expect their voices to carry proportional weight in League decisions. But smaller members argue that such arrangements would effectively transform voluntary cooperation into domination by a few powerful cities, undermining the egalitarian principles that originally attracted them to League membership. These internal political tensions intersect with growing economic competition between League members. As Hanseatic merchants become more sophisticated and successful, they increasingly find themselves competing with each other for the same markets and opportunities. A Hamburg merchant's success in the English wool trade might come at the expense of his Lübeck counterpart's traditional business relationships. Danzig's growing dominance in the grain trade creates concerns among other Baltic cities that their own agricultural exports are being displaced. The League's traditional approach of seeking mutually beneficial solutions becomes more difficult when members' interests actually conflict rather than simply requiring coordination. How can the Confederation balance support for Danzig's efficient grain operations against Bremen's desire to maintain its own agricultural trade connections? How can Bergen's dominance in the stockfish market be reconciled with other cities' aspirations to develop their own fishing industries? Religious differences, largely dormant during the League's early expansion, begin to surface as sources of tension as the Confederation extends into regions with different Christian traditions. The Catholic orthodoxy that prevails in most League cities doesn't always align comfortably with the Orthodox Christianity of Russian trading partners or the evolving Protestant movements that emerge in some German territories. While these differences rarely prevent commercial cooperation, they can complicate the cultural and political relationships that undergird League solidarity. The generational transition from the League's founding merchants to their successors creates subtle but significant changes in organizational culture. The original founders, united by shared struggles against piracy and arbitrary taxation, developed deep personal relationships and genuine commitment to cooperative principles. Their sons and grandsons, inheriting prosperous businesses and established League membership, may lack the same emotional investment in cooperative ideals. For the second generation, League membership is an inheritance rather than an achievement, a business tool rather than a revolutionary innovation. This generational shift manifests in various ways that gradually erode League cohesion. Younger merchants may be more willing to pursue individual opportunities at the expense of League solidarity. They may chafe at traditional League practices that seem unnecessarily restrictive or outdated. Most importantly, they may lack the personal relationships with merchants from other cities that helped earlier generations resolve disputes. Through informal negotiations rather than formal procedures, the leagues vary success in standardizing. Commercial practices creates new sources of internal tension. As Hanseatic methods become widely adopted throughout Northern Europe, league cities lose some of their competitive advantages over non-member merchants. Success breeds imitation, and imitation erodes the exclusive benefits that originally made league membership attractive. Some members begin to question whether the costs and obligations of league membership are justified by benefits that seem to be diminishing. External pressure from growing. Royal power creates internal divisions about how the league should respond to challenges from traditional political authorities. Some members favor accommodation and diplomacy, arguing that the league's commercial interests are best served by maintaining good relationships with kings and nobles. Others advocate for more assertive defense of league privileges, contending that compromise will only encourage further encroachments on Hanseatic independence. These strategic disagreements reflect different assessments of the league's position and capabilities, but they also reveal different visions of what the Confederation should become. Should it evolve into something resembling a territorial state, with formal political structures and military capabilities that can challenge royal authority directly? Or should it remain primarily a commercial alliance, adapting to changing political circumstances while maintaining focus on trade and economic cooperation? The complexity of these internal challenges is compounded by the league's informal decision-making structures, which lack clear mechanisms for resolving fundamental disagreements between members. The Confederation's strength lies partly in its voluntary character, but voluntary associations find it difficult to compel compliance from members who disagree with collective decisions. Unlike kingdoms or empires, the League can't simply impose solutions on recalcitrant members. It must persuade them or risk fragmentation. Yet despite these growing tensions, the League demonstrates remarkable resilience in finding ways to manage internal conflicts without destroying the cooperative foundations that make it successful. Compromise solutions emerge that may not satisfy everyone completely, but preserve the essential benefits of membership for all parties. Institutional innovations develop that provide better mechanisms for handling disputes and coordinating complex activities. The League's experience with internal challenges reveals both the strengths and limitations of voluntary cooperation as a form of political and economic organization. Such systems can achieve remarkable results when members' interests align, but they struggle when fundamental conflicts emerge that can't be resolved through mutual accommodation. As we observe these gentle fractures slowly widening within the League's structure, we see not the beginning of inevitable collapse, but the natural evolution of a mature organization learning to balance individual autonomy with collective action. The League's ability to manage these internal tensions will largely determine whether it can adapt to the even greater external challenges that are beginning to emerge from the changing political landscape of medieval Europe. The morning light reveals changes in the political landscape that seemed impossible just a generation earlier. As the scattered kingdoms and duchies of medieval Europe begin to coalesce into something approaching modern nation-states, from castle towers and city walls, Hanseatic merchants watch with growing concern. As their traditional advantage is the fragmentation of political authority that made their commercial networks so valuable slowly give way to new forms of centralized power that view merchant autonomy with suspicion and envy. The emergence of stronger royal governments doesn't happen overnight, but its effects on Hanseatic commerce become increasingly apparent as the 14th and 15th centuries progress. Kings who once depended on merchant wealth to finance their modest courts and limited military operations now command resources that enable them to challenge merchant privileges directly. The revenues from expanded taxation, more efficient administration, and growing populations give royal governments capabilities that individual merchant cities, however prosperous, find difficult to match. Denmark's transformation under strong monarchs, like Valdemar IV, provides a particularly troubling example for League observers. The Danish crown's growing control over the entrance to the Baltic Sea, the narrow straits that connect the Baltic to the North Sea, and the broader European Denmark leverage over Hanseatic commerce that no individual merchant or city can effectively counter. When Danish officials impose new tolls or restrictions on Baltic shipping, League merchants must either pay the increased costs or find alternative routes that may not exist. The Danish challenge forces the League to confront a fundamental question about its nature and capabilities. Is the Confederation primarily a commercial alliance that must adapt to political realities created by others? Or does it have the capacity to function as a political entity in its own right, capable of challenging royal authority when merchant interests are threatened? The League's response to Danish pressure will largely determine its future role in Northern European politics. The conflict that emerges between the League and Denmark reveals both the strengths and limitations of Hanseatic power. The League's ability to coordinate economic pressure, redirecting trade routes, boycotting Danish ports, and denying Danish merchants access to League networks proves remarkably effective in compelling royal attention. But economic warfare requires sustained commitment from all League members, and maintaining such unity becomes increasingly difficult as the costs of conflict mount and individual members begin to calculate whether compromise might serve their particular interests better than continued confrontation. Sweden's parallel development as a more centralized kingdom creates similar challenges in the Eastern Baltic. Swedish control over crucial iron and copper deposits gives the crown leverage over metallurgical trades that are essential to Hanseatic prosperity. More importantly, Sweden's growing naval capabilities enable it to challenge League dominance of Baltic shipping routes directly. When Swedish and Hanseatic vessels compete for the same trading opportunities, the backing of royal authority gives Swedish merchants advantages that purely commercial considerations can't overcome. The rise of England as a unified kingdom under strong monarchs presents different, but equally serious challenges to Hanseatic interests. English control over wool production, the foundation of Northern Europe's most profitable textile trades, enables the crown to manipulate market conditions in ways that can devastate League merchants who have built their businesses around predictable access to English raw materials. When English kings decide to favor domestic cloth production over raw wool exports, or when they grant exclusive privileges to English merchants at the expense of foreign traders, the effects ripple throughout the Hanseatic system. The English challenge is particularly complex because it combines economic competition with diplomatic complications. The League's traditional approach of treating individual cities and regions as separate entities becomes problematic when dealing with increasingly unified kingdoms that expect to be approached as single political entities. The Steel Yard in London, which once negotiated primarily with London authorities about local trading conditions, now finds itself dealing with national policies that affect all of England and may be decided by royal councils with little interest in or understanding of merchant concerns. The Netherlands' emergence as a major commercial power presents perhaps the most direct challenge to Hanseatic dominance of Northern European trade. Dutch merchants adopt and improve upon many Hanseatic innovations, standardized shipping practices, sophisticated credit systems, international networking, while benefiting from more centralized political support than the League's voluntary confederation can provide. Dutch success in developing new trade routes to Asia and the Americas creates opportunities that dwarf traditional Baltic commerce, drawing capital and expertise. away from Hanseatic networks. The Dutch example is particularly troubling for League observers because it demonstrates that commercial success no longer requires the kind of multi-city confederation that the League represents. A single, well-organized political entity with appropriate commercial policies can achieve results that match or exceed those of voluntary merchant alliances. This realization forces League members to question whether their traditional organizational advantages are becoming obsolete. The growing power of the Holy Roman Empire under more effective emperors creates additional complications for League cities that technically owe allegiance to imperial authority. When emperors like Charles IV and Maximilian I assert more direct control over imperial cities, League members find themselves caught between their traditional autonomy and their formal political obligations. The tension between League membership and imperial citizenship becomes increasingly difficult to manage as both entities demand exclusive loyalty in situations where their interests conflict. These external pressures interact with the internal tensions we observed earlier to create compound stresses that challenge the League's traditional methods of maintaining cohesion. Individual member cities begin to calculate whether their interests might be better served by accommodation with growing royal powers rather than continued resistance in coordination with League partners. The defection of key members could trigger a cascade of similar decisions that would effectively dissolve the Confederation. The League's attempts to adapt to these new political realities reveal both institutional flexibility and structural limitations. Diplomatic innovations that treat kingdoms as unified entities rather than collections of separate regions enable more effective negotiations with royal governments. But such centralized diplomacy requires League members to surrender some of their traditional autonomy to Confederation representatives, a compromise that many cities find difficult to accept. Military cooperation becomes more essential, but also more difficult as the scale of potential conflicts grows beyond what individual cities can manage. The League's traditional approach of organizing specific expeditions for limited objectives becomes inadequate when facing sustained pressure from major kingdoms. But developing permanent military capabilities requires resource, commitments, and command structures that threaten the voluntary character that has always been central to League identity. Perhaps most fundamentally, the rise of nation-states challenges the League's basic assumption that commercial relationships can remain separate from political ones. The new royal governments view commerce as an extension of political power, a tool that should serve state interests rather than operating according to its own logic. This perspective makes the League's traditional political neutrality increasingly untenable as external authorities demand that merchant loyalty translate into political support. The League's response to these challenges will determine whether the Confederation can adapt to a changing political environment or whether it will gradually become an anachronism, a medieval institution unable to survive in an early modern world. The choice is made by individual member cities in the coming decades will shape not just their own futures, but the fate of one of history's most remarkable experiments in voluntary cooperation. As we observe these rising powers consolidating their strength and asserting new forms of authority over the territories where Hanseatic merchants have long operated as autonomous agents, we witness the beginning of a fundamental transformation in the balance of political and economic power in Northern Europe. The question now becomes whether the League can reinvent itself quickly enough to remain relevant in this new environment, or whether its greatest achievements will become merely historical memories, like an ancient tree that continues to cast an impressive shadow long after its roots have begun to weaken. The Hanseatic League maintains its outward appearance of strength and prosperity even as the foundations of its power slowly erode beneath the surface. The decline isn't dramatic or sudden. There are no decisive battles or catastrophic events that mark the end of an era. Instead, what we witness is a gradual fading, a slow loss of relevance as the world changes around institutions that once seemed unshakably permanent. The transformation becomes most apparent in the League's response to new trading opportunities that emerge beyond traditional Northern European routes. When Portuguese and Spanish explorers opened sea routes to Asia and the Americas, creating possibilities for profits that dwarf traditional Baltic commerce, Hanseatic merchants find themselves poorly positioned to participate. The League's network, so perfectly adapted to connecting Northern European cities, become limitations when global opportunities require different kinds of capital organization and political support. Individual League members recognize these new opportunities and attempt to adapt. But their efforts reveal how the Confederation's traditional strengths have become weaknesses in a changed environment. The small-scale, family-based commercial operations that served Baltic trade so well lack the capital resources needed for transoceanic ventures. The League's voluntary cooperation, so effective for coordinating regional activities, proves inadequate for organizing the kind of sustained, large-scale investments that global commerce requires. More fundamentally, the new global trades operate according to different principles from traditional Hanseatic commerce. Success in Asian and American markets depends heavily on military power and political support that can establish and maintain colonial outposts, protect shipping routes from non-European threats, and negotiate with unfamiliar political systems. The League's traditional separation of commercial and political activities becomes a fatal disadvantage when competing with Dutch, English, and French enterprises that benefit from direct royal support and military protection. The League's internal structure, which once facilitated rapid adaptation to changing conditions, begins to impede necessary innovations. The voluntary nature of Confederation membership means that individual cities can block collective initiatives that they perceive as threatening their particular interests. When some members propose pooling resources for global ventures, others resist committing their wealth to uncertain enterprises that might benefit competitors more than themselves. The generational transition that we observed earlier accelerates as younger merchants, educated in an environment where global opportunities seem more attractive than traditional regional trades, question their inherited commitment to League institutions. Many of the most talented and ambitious young merchants leave League cities entirely, seeking opportunities in Amsterdam, London, or other emerging centers of global commerce. This brain drain gradually weakens the League's human capital just when it most needs innovative leadership. The political pressures from strengthening nation-states, which initially seemed manageable through diplomatic adaptation, prove more corrosive than League leaders initially realized. Royal governments don't simply demand accommodation, they systematically undermine the autonomy that makes League membership attractive. When kings impose direct taxation on merchant activities, establish royal monopolies over profitable trades, or require merchants to obtain licenses that can be revoked at will, they effectively transform independent commercial operators into subordinate agents of state policy. The League's attempts to resist these encroachments through traditional methods, economic pressure, diplomatic negotiation, and appeals to establish privileges, prove increasingly ineffective against royal governments that have developed alternative sources of revenue and legitimacy. A kingdom that derives significant income from colonial enterprises and domestic taxation can withstand Hanseatic economic boycotts that might have been decisive in earlier centuries, military conflicts that once served to demonstrate League power, and resolve increasingly reveal the Confederation's limitations relative to emerging nation-states. When the League organizes naval expeditions, it must coordinate contributions from dozens of individual cities, each with their own priorities and constraints. Royal navies, operating under unified command, with consistent funding and strategic objectives, consistently outperform Hanseatic forces that struggle to maintain cohesion during extended operations. The technological changes that accompany the early modern period also disadvantage Hanseatic operations in subtle but important ways. The League's commercial success had always depended partly on superior organization and information systems. That gave member merchants advantages over less sophisticated competitors. But printing technology rapidly democratizes access to commercial information, while improved transportation and communication systems reduce the value of the League's traditional networking advantages. The religious upheavals of the Protestant Reformation create additional stresses that the League's traditional institutions prove unable to manage effectively. When member cities choose different sides in religious conflicts, the cultural unity that once reinforced commercial cooperation begins to fracture. Catholic and Protestant League members find it increasingly difficult to maintain close relationships. When their religious differences are reinforced by political alignments that pit their respective kingdoms against each other in prolonged warfare, the League's response to the Reformation reveals how external pressures can exploit internal weaknesses to accelerate institutional decline. Rather than developing mechanisms for managing religious diversity while preserving commercial cooperation, the Confederation allows religious differences to become sources of permanent division. Cities that might have remained committed League members despite other challenges find religious conflicts sufficient reason to question their continued participation. The economic disruptions caused by prolonged religious warfare compound the League's difficulties by disrupting traditional trade routes and creating new sources of political instability. When armies march across territories that have been peaceful commercial regions for generations, when sieges close ports that serve as crucial links in trading networks, and when religious persecution drives skilled merchants and craftsmen from their homes, the predictable conditions that enabled Hanseatic prosperity disappear. Perhaps most damaging to League prospects is the gradual realization among member cities that Confederation's membership no longer provides clear advantages over independent operation. Cities that once needed League networks to access distant markets discover that new transportation and communication technologies enable them to develop direct relationships with trading partners. The protection that League membership once provided against pirates and arbitrary taxation becomes less valuable as royal navies. Patrol shipping lanes and standardized legal systems reduce commercial uncertainties. The League's institutional responses to these challenges reveal an organization that has become too rigid to adapt effectively to changed circumstances. Traditional decision-making processes that once facilitated cooperation among like-minded merchants become obstacles to rapid innovation when circumstances require fundamental changes in strategy and organization. The Confederation's commitment to voluntary cooperation, once its greatest strength, becomes a weakness when voluntary decisions consistently favor short-term individual interests over long-term collective needs. The financial difficulties that result from declining commercial advantages create a vicious cycle that accelerates institutional decay. As League revenues decrease, the Confederation reduces its investments in the very activities diplomatic representation, military capabilities, information gathering that might enable recovery. Individual members calculating that they're receiving fewer benefits for their contributions reduce their own commitments to collective activities, further weakening League capabilities, yet even in decline. The League demonstrates remarkable resilience and adaptability. Individual cities that remain committed to Hanseatic ideals find ways to maintain cooperation despite institutional weaknesses, as commercial relationships that began within League frameworks continue to operate even when formal Confederation structures prove inadequate. The cultural ties that developed during centuries of cooperation survive political and economic changes that might have been expected to destroy them completely. As we observe this slow dissolution of what once seemed an unshakable institution, we witness not failure, but the natural evolution of human organizations as they respond to changing circumstances. The League's decline doesn't negate its achievements or render its innovations irrelevant. It simply demonstrates that even the most successful institutions must eventually adapt or yield to new forms of organization better suited to changed conditions. The question now becomes, what will survive from this remarkable experiment in voluntary cooperation, and how the lessons learned from both Hanseatic success and decline might inform future attempts to balance individual autonomy with collective action in an ever-changing world. Standing in the amber light of a Baltic sunset, looking across waters that once carried the hopes and fortunes of medieval merchants, we can still feel the presence of something extraordinary that once flourished here, the great trading fleets. may have long since faded into memory, but their legacy lives on in ways both obvious and subtle, woven into the very fabric of Northern European civilization, like golden threads that catch the light when viewed from the proper angle. Walk through the old town of Lübeck today. The medieval world of the Hanseatic League suddenly feels immediate and tangible. The distinctive brick Gothic architecture that once announced Hanseatic presence to arriving merchants still dominates the skyline. Its red facades warming in sunlight just as they did when this was the unofficial capital of Northern Europe's greatest commercial confederation. The Holstenter, that iconic twin-towered gateway, stands as more than a tourist attraction. It's a portal between past and present, inviting modern visitors to step through and imagine what it meant to be part of something unprecedented in medieval history. The UNESCO World Heritage designation that protects Lübeck's medieval core recognizes more than architectural beauty. It acknowledges the continuing relevance of Hanseatic innovations to our understanding of how voluntary cooperation can create prosperity and cultural achievement. The same recognition extends to other former League cities, Wismar and Stralsund in Germany, Visby on the Swedish island of Gotland, the historic centers of Tallinn in Estonia and Riga in Latvia. Each site preserves not just buildings, but entire urban environments that demonstrate how medieval merchants created communities that were simultaneously local and international. But the League's influence extends far beyond preserved historic districts and museum collections. Modern Hamburg's position as one of Europe's major ports owes much to advantages. First developed during the Hanseatic period, the sophisticated harbor facilities, the commercial law traditions, and the international connections that made the city a natural gateway between continental Europe and global maritime trade. The merchants who built Hamburg's medieval prosperity established patterns of development that continue to shape the city's economy and character today. Bergen, Norway's historic center, still echoes with memories of the Hanseatic contour that once controlled the North Atlantic fisheries. The wooden buildings of the Bryggen district, UNESCO-protected survivors of centuries of fires and rebuilding, house modern businesses that serve international tourists rather than medieval merchants. But the narrow alleyways and intimate courtyards preserve the spatial relationships that facilitated Hanseatic commerce. Local museums don't just display artifacts, they help visitors understand how medieval innovations in fish processing, preservation, and distribution created economic foundations that continue to support modern Norwegian prosperity. The legal and commercial innovations that emerged from Hanseatic practice have influenced the development of modern international business law in ways that lawyers and scholars continue to study and apply. The League's approaches to contract standardization, dispute resolution, and cross-border cooperation anticipated many of the challenges that face contemporary international commerce. Maritime law, commercial arbitration, and international trade practices all retain traces of principles first developed in medieval, Baltic, and North Sea trading networks. Perhaps most remarkably, the European Union itself can be seen as a distant heir to Hanseatic ideals, a voluntary confederation of sovereign entities that choose to cooperate for mutual benefit rather than submitting to external authority. The EU's emphasis on economic integration as a foundation for political cooperation, its respect for member state autonomy within agreed frameworks, and its commitment to peaceful resolution of disputes all echo principles that Hanseatic merchants discovered through practical necessity centuries before political theorists developed formal concepts of federal cooperation. The cultural heritage that survives from the Hanseatic period enriches contemporary European identity in countless ways. The musical traditions that developed in League cities, blending influences from across Northern Europe, contributed to the emergence of distinctly regional styles that continue to influence composers and performers today. The architectural techniques pioneered in Hanseatic construction projects spread throughout Northern Europe, creating visual continuities that help define regional aesthetic traditions. Modern tourism has discovered the appeal of Hanseatic heritage. creating new forms of international cooperation that mirror medieval trading networks. The modern Hanseatic League, a voluntary association of cities that celebrate their historical connections, organizes cultural exchanges and economic cooperation that would seem familiar to medieval merchants. Tourist routes that connect former League cities enable contemporary travelers to follow paths first charted by medieval merchants, experiencing landscapes and communities that preserve echoes of their historical significance. The academic study of the Hanseatic League has revealed insights about voluntary cooperation, international commerce, and cultural exchange that remain relevant to contemporary challenges. Historians, economists, and political scientists continue to analyze Hanseatic innovations for lessons that might inform modern approaches to international relations, economic development, and cultural preservation. The League's experience demonstrates both the possibilities and limitations of voluntary cooperation as an alternative to coercive forms of organization. Environmental initiatives in the Baltic Sea region often invoke Hanseatic precedents to justify contemporary cooperation across national boundaries. The Medieval League's success in creating shared standards and common approaches to resource management provides historical validation for modern efforts to address pollution, overfishing, and climate change through voluntary international cooperation. The Baltic Sea, once a Hanseatic lake, becomes a symbol of how historical experience can inform contemporary environmental stewardship. The languages of Northern Europe retain vocabulary and expressions that originated in Hanseatic commercial practice. Words related to commerce, navigation, and international cooperation often derive from the Low German that served as the lingua franca of League operations. These linguistic survivals remind us that the League's influence extended into the most basic aspects of daily communication, creating shared concepts that facilitated understanding across cultural boundaries. Modern port cities throughout Northern Europe maintain facilities and practices that trace their origins to Hanseatic innovations. Warehouse designs, harbor layouts, cargo handling techniques that emerged from medieval necessity continue to influence contemporary maritime infrastructure. The efficiency and standardization that characterized Hanseatic operations established patterns of development that modern logistics systems have built upon rather than replaced. Educational institutions in former League cities often emphasize their connections to Hanseatic heritage, using historical examples to teach contemporary students about international business, cultural exchange, and voluntary cooperation. Universities that began as medieval schools for training merchants continued to prepare students for careers in international commerce, maintaining institutional continuities that span centuries. But perhaps the most important legacy of the Hanseatic League lies not in any specific institution or practice, but in the demonstration that voluntary cooperation based on mutual benefit can achieve results that rival those of more coercive forms of organization. In an era when international relations often seem dominated by conflict and competition, the League's example reminds us that cooperation remains possible when approached with appropriate institutions, realistic expectations, and genuine commitment to mutual benefit. As the evening light fades across the Baltic waters and modern cities illuminate ancient harbors with electric brightness, we see reflected in those waters the continuing presence of medieval innovations that helped shape the modern world. The great merchant fleets may be gone, but their legacy continues in every international business transaction, every voluntary international organization, and every community that chooses cooperation over conflict as a path to prosperity and security. The Hanseatic League's story doesn't end with medieval decline, it continues. Wherever people discover that working together serves their interests better than working apart, and that voluntary cooperation can be more powerful than imposed authority. As our long journey through the Hanseatic centuries draws to its close, we find ourselves once again beside the waters that witnessed the birth, flourishing, and gentle fading of one of history's most remarkable experiments in human cooperation. The waves that lap against these ancient harbors carry more than salt and memory. They bear the enduring wisdom of merchants who discovered that their individual dreams could be achieved more surely through shared effort than solitary ambition. In the gathering, twilight of our narrative, the lessons of the Hanseatic League settle around us. It's like the evening mist that softens the harsh edges of medieval stone and brick. What emerges from centuries of cooperative commerce isn't a simple tale of rise and fall, but something more subtle and enduring, a demonstration of possibilities that remain as relevant today as they were when the first Baltic merchants decided to sail together rather than alone. The League's story teaches us first about the power of voluntary association in a world that often assumes cooperation must be imposed from above. The merchants who created this confederation weren't forced together by conquest or royal decree. They chose each other, again and again, because they discovered that mutual benefit could grow stronger over time rather than weaker. This choice, renewed with each generation, created bonds that proved more durable than many relationships built on force or tradition. Their success reminds us that effective cooperation doesn't require the elimination of competition or individual ambition. Hanseatic merchants competed vigorously with each other in countless ways, while maintaining their collective commitment to the institutions and practices that served. They discovered that cooperation and competition could coexist and even strengthen each other when properly balanced, creating environments where individual excellence contributed to collective success. The League's approach to dealing with diversity offers lessons that resonate across centuries. These merchants came from different cities, regions, and cultural traditions. Yet they found ways to preserve their distinct identities while building genuine unity around shared purposes. They didn't seek to create uniformity, but rather to develop systems that could accommodate difference while facilitating cooperation. Their success suggests that unity and diversity aren't opposites, but complementary aspects of healthy communities. Perhaps most importantly, the Hanseatic League demonstrates the creative power that emerges when people approach problems with open minds and practical flexibility. The innovations that made League success possible, from standardized contracts to international credit systems to cooperative maritime security, weren't imposed by central authority, but emerged organically from the collective wisdom of merchants facing common challenges. The League became a laboratory for social and economic innovation because its voluntary character encouraged experimentation and adaptation. The League's eventual decline teaches lessons as valuable as those from its success. Even the most effective institutions must eventually adapt to changing circumstances or risk becoming irrelevant. The Confederation's inability to respond effectively to the rise of nation-states and global commerce doesn't diminish its earlier achievements. It simply reminds us that no organizational form, however successful, can remain appropriate indefinitely in a changing world. Yet the League's influence didn't end with its formal decline. Its innovations in commercial law, international cooperation, and voluntary organization influenced the development of modern institutions in ways that continue to benefit contemporary society. The European Union, modern international business practices, and countless voluntary organizations all owe debts to principles that Hanseatic merchants pioneered through practical necessity. Cultural achievements of the League offer their own lessons about the relationship between material prosperity and spiritual fulfillment. The merchants who built these trading networks didn't pursue wealth as an end in itself, but as a means to create communities that could sustain both individual flourishing and collective achievement. Their cities became centers of artistic, intellectual, and spiritual development, because they understood that human beings need more than material security to live meaningful lives. The environmental wisdom embedded in Hanseatic practices provides guidance for contemporary challenges that the medieval merchants could never have imagined. Their approach to resource management, based on long-term thinking, sustainable practices, and recognition that individual short-term gains must be balanced against collective long-term interests, offers insights that remain relevant to modern environmental challenges. The League's experience with conflict resolution demonstrates that differences don't have to become permanent divisions. Hanseatic cities faced countless disputes over resources, territories, and policies. Yet they consistently found ways to resolve conflicts without destroying the relationships that made cooperation possible. Their emphasis on negotiation, compromise, and mutual accommodation created patterns of peaceful dispute resolution that served them well for centuries. As we reflect on the human dimension of the Hanseatic story, we're reminded that history isn't made by abstract forces, but by individual people making countless daily choices about how to relate to each other. The League succeeded because thousands of merchants, craftsmen, sailors, and citizens chose cooperation over conflict, trust over suspicion, and mutual benefit over narrow self-interest. These choices, repeated across generations, created something that was greater than the sum of its parts. The League's legacy suggests that ordinary people, working together with patience and persistence, can achieve extraordinary results without waiting for perfect leaders or ideal circumstances. The merchants who built this confederation weren't exceptional individuals with unique talents. They were practical people who discovered that their common challenges could be addressed through uncommon cooperation. In our modern world, where international cooperation often seems difficult and voluntary, organizations frequently struggle to maintain effectiveness. The Hanseatic example offers both inspiration and practical guidance. It demonstrates that voluntary cooperation can work on a large scale when approached with appropriate institutions, realistic expectations, and genuine commitment to mutual benefit. As the last light fades from the Baltic sky, the ancient harbors settle into the peaceful darkness that has embraced them for countless centuries. We carry with us the quiet wisdom of medieval merchants who discovered that the greatest achievements often emerge not from grand gestures, but from daily choices to work together rather than apart. The waves continue their eternal rhythm against these shores, carrying forward the echoes of voices that spoke of cooperation and mutual benefit, of diversity within unity, and of the possibility that human beings can create something beautiful and lasting when they choose to trust each other enough to build together. In that gentle sound, we hear not an ending, but a continuing invitation, a reminder that the possibilities the Hanseatic League discovered remain available to anyone willing to choose cooperation over conflict, patience over haste, and shared dreams over solitary ambitions. The story of the Hanseatic League doesn't end with our narrative. It continues wherever people gather to discover what they might accomplish together that none could achieve alone. In boardrooms, in community centers, in international organizations, in neighborhood associations, in every place where individuals choose to trust each other enough to work toward common goals, the spirit of those medieval merchants lives on, patient as the tides and enduring as the northern seas themselves.